Have you ever had the feeling that something isn't right, but you just can't explain what it is? Sometimes terror doesn't come from things we can see, but from something we feel, something we know is there, but can't touch. Today, I'm going to share with you 3 real stories of people who lived through such terrifying moments that, to this day, they question whether they truly happened or were just tricks of their minds. These are experiences that leave scars, that make you look at the darkness differently, and maybe even rethink what is real. If you're sensitive to the supernatural, you might want to think twice before continuing. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear may be more than just a simple story. These are stories that might change the way you see the world around you. I never imagined that a simple night at home could change my life forever. That night, I was alone, like so many others. The rain tapped against the windows, a constant sound that gave me a sense of comfort, almost like it was rocking me to sleep. I had just finished watching a movie and was heading to bed when something strange happened. First, there was a noise from above. Nothing major, I thought, just the wood settling, the house adjusting. But then, the sound repeated. This time, it was louder, clearer, almost like a footstep. I froze. No one else was home, I was sure of it. My parents had gone away for the weekend and the house was silent, except for the sound of the rain. But that didn't make sense. I decided to ignore it, trying to rationalize. It must be the wind, I told myself. But the sound continued, stronger now, as if someone was walking slowly down the hallway. I knew it couldn't be my imagination. The noise wasn't something natural. And then, a little voice in my head whispered, "Go check it out." I didn't know where that feeling came from, but something in my chest told me I shouldn't ignore it. With my heart pounding, I got up and walked to the stairs. The dark hallway seemed longer than usual, tighter, and with each step, a growing chill spread through my body. I reached the top of the stairs and paused for a moment, trying to listen for anything else, but the silence was absolute. Then, I decided to check the attic. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop thinking about that strange feeling. Something was up there. I grabbed the key and with trembling hands, unlocked the attic door. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each step feeling higher, darker, and more suffocating. The smell of mold and dust hit me hard. When I reached the top, the darkness was so thick that I could barely see my hand in front of me. I was about to go back down when I heard a whisper, a low, almost imperceptible sound, like someone saying my name. "Lucas." I froze. My heart pounded, and a wave of terror washed over me. There was no one there. It was impossible. But I heard it. I swear I did. The voice was clear and close, dragging out each syllable. I tried to leave, tried to run to the stairs, but something stopped me. The attic door, which had opened so easily before, was now stuck. I pushed with all my strength, but I couldn't move it. And that's when something much worse happened. The sound of the rain outside disappeared. The silence was absolute, and in the middle of that void, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps, coming up the attic stairs, moving toward me. And it wasn't a person. It was something much heavier, as if the very air was being pulled into that room. The pressure was suffocating me, and my body began to panic. With wide eyes, I looked around, desperate for an escape. But everything was exactly as I had left it. The only thing that moved was a shadow, slowly growing on the opposite wall. It had no defined shape, but I knew it was coming for me. I couldn't stay there any longer. With all my strength, I shoved the door again, and this time, it gave way. I ran down the stairs without looking back. I could hear something dragging behind me, but I didn't dare stop to see what it was. When I reached the hallway, the noise stopped, but the fear didn't. I slammed the attic door shut and locked it, my heart still pounding in my chest. The feeling that something was watching me never left. I went to the living room, still breathless, but the silence once again took over the house. The rain no longer felt comforting. It sounded distant, irrelevant, as if the house itself was alive and watching me. I sat on the couch, trying to calm myself, but something told me this wasn't over. The rest of the night was a nightmare. Every little sound made me jump. Every creaking door made me look over my shoulder. And I knew that sooner or later, the shadow I saw in the attic would return. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what was up there, but one thing is certain, it wasn't human. And ever since that night, whenever I'm home alone, I feel like something is watching me, waiting for the right moment to show itself again. I've always loved camping. There was something magical about being surrounded by nature, far from the chaos of the city, away from anything that could distract me. When my friends suggested a trip to an isolated campsite, the idea seemed perfect. It was the kind of place where no one would bother us, and the setting looked like paradise. A dense forest, a small clearing to set up our tent, and a quiet stream flowing nearby. We arrived in the late afternoon and immediately started setting up camp. The weather was pleasant, but as the sun began to set, a strange feeling crept over me. It wasn't exactly fear. It was a feeling of discomfort, as if someone was watching, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I glanced at my friends, who were busy lighting the campfire and laughing. I decided not to say anything, thinking I was just being paranoid. Night fell, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees mixed with the distant noises of nocturnal animals. We were all sitting around the fire, talking about everything and nothing, when one of my friends, Sarah, asked, "Have you guys ever heard the local legends? They say this forest is cursed." Everyone laughed, but a part of me didn't find it funny. I had heard stories about people disappearing in isolated forests, but I never thought something like that could happen to us. Sarah, however, was serious. "They say there's something in the forest, something that hides in the shadows and only comes out when the sky is dark enough to cover its steps," she continued, and her voice was visibly tense. I didn't pay much attention, but the uneasiness I already felt started growing. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what. To clear my head, I walked a little farther to the edge of the clearing. The full moon cast an eerie glow over the forest. The shadows of the trees stretched long and distorted, and every movement seemed amplified by the darkness. That's when I heard something, a crack, like someone stepping on a dry branch. I quickly looked around but saw nothing. I decided to head back to camp, trying to ignore the feeling that I was no longer alone. When I returned to the tent, everything seemed normal, but the conversation had stopped. My friends were silent, staring at the forest, as if they were hearing something I couldn't detect. "What is it?" I asked, trying to hide my own apprehension. "We don't know," Michael said tensely. "But did you hear that noise?" I was about to respond when the sound came again, louder this time. A crack, followed by a dragging noise, as if someone, or something, was moving through the forest, not even trying to stay hidden. The sound came from multiple directions at once, as if surrounding our clearing. "We should leave. Now," I suggested, my voice trembling, but the others seemed more confused than scared. "It's just an animal," Sarah said. "Probably a deer or something." But I knew it wasn't an animal. That had a human quality to it. Something or someone was out there, moving with intention. I didn't know what, but I could feel its presence. The sounds continued for a while until tension spread through the group. The fire was dying down, and the darkness of the forest seemed to expand with every passing second. Then we started hearing whispers coming from beyond the clearing, but there was no one there, as if multiple people were surrounding us, yet no one appeared. Suddenly, someone screamed. It was Jessica, one of my friends, who had stepped away a bit. When I turned to her, she was pointing at the forest, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw it," she whispered, barely audible. "I saw something human." We all looked in the direction she pointed, but there was nothing. No figure, no shadow, but the fear was clear on everyone's faces. That was it. We decided to pack up and leave as quickly as possible. We hurriedly took down our tents, but when I looked back, I saw a figure. It stood at the edge of the clearing, a vague, indistinct shadow, almost shapeless. Yet its presence was palpable. It was watching our every move. "Go!" I shouted. "Now!" We grabbed our backpacks, and within minutes we were rushing down the trail leading to the road. But what happened next was even more terrifying. When we reached the road and looked back, there was nothing. No shadows, no figures. The forest seemed calm, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, I knew something wasn't right. The feeling of being watched never left me. And the worst part? To this day, every time I find myself in an isolated place, I hear the same slow footsteps following me. I never found out what followed us that night. I don't know if it was a person, a spirit, or something else, but one thing is certain: it wasn't made of flesh and bone. I was a young doctor, freshly graduated, when I was assigned to work at an isolated psychiatric hospital in a small town. It was a grim place, with walls worn down by time and an oppressive atmosphere, as if the building itself was burdened with dark secrets. The hospital had a history of experimental treatments and inhumane conditions, but I was excited about the chance to work there. The idea of helping those people, understanding their minds and their pain, felt noble. However, the moment I stepped in for my first shift, something felt off. The hospital was eerily silent, except for the sound of footsteps. Patients wandering the halls, their eyes hollow, their bodies visibly twisted, as if their very sanity had been stripped away. I was assigned to the night shift, when things became even stranger. At night, the hospital seemed to have a life of its own, as if the walls whispered ancient secrets. I was used to hearing stories about the place, but nothing prepared me for what I actually encountered. One night, as I was walking through the corridors, checking patient rooms, I stumbled upon one of the hospital's oldest records. The patient's name was Edgar. His file had a single note at the end. Last line. I found it curious and decided to ask the nurse in charge about him. "Who is Edgar?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Edgar." The nurse looked at me with an empty stare. "He died years ago, but he's still here." I frowned. "What do you mean he's still here?" The nurse shrugged. "This place has its ways. Don't worry about it. Focus on the other patients." That answer made no sense, but I let it go. What unsettled me more was that no one seemed to talk about Edgar's death. He had simply disappeared. And as the days passed, the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this place only grew stronger. On one particularly humid night, I was assigned to patrol the floor where Edgar had stayed. The hospital was silent, except for the sound of my boots on the empty corridor. When I passed Edgar's old room, the door was slightly open. I hesitated for a moment, but stepped inside. The room was completely disordered. The walls, once white, were stained with a dark hue, as if something had seeped from them. The air was thick and warm, and the dim light from the ceiling bulb flickered, casting moving shadows. As I entered, I felt a sudden chill, something that didn't match the heat of the room. And then I saw him. Edgar was there, sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, his body frail, his face pale and slick with a thin layer of sweat. His eyes were fixed on a point ahead, staring at something I couldn't see. Stepping closer, I asked, "Edgar, are you okay?" He didn't respond. His eyes, however, slowly turned toward me, and a chilling dread washed over me. His eyes didn't seem human. They were empty yet somehow, deep, as if something else was inside them, something that shouldn't be there. Unable to look away, I asked, "What happened here?" Edgar let out a weak sigh and mumbled something I couldn't understand. I crouched closer, trying to hear his words. He repeated, this time clearer, "The last line is not the end." At that moment, the room's light flickered violently, and I felt a freezing chill crawl down my spine. When the light steadied, Edgar was gone. The chair was empty, and the air around where he had sat was dense and heavy, as if something had been pulled away. The sense of terror deepened. Something was terribly wrong with this place, far more than I had imagined. As I returned to the infirmary, I couldn't stop thinking about Edgar's words. The last line is not the end. They echoed in my mind like a persistent whisper, urging me to return to his room. That night, I revisited Edgar's old file. With trembling hands, I examined the last line in his record. There was something there that wasn't in any other document. Patient did not die. Case transferred to line 666, a designation I had never seen before. I went to the ward where patients were still receiving treatment and asked about line 666, but no one seemed to know what it meant. When I returned to Edgar's room, I found a hidden door behind a fallen bookshelf. My heart pounded as I stepped inside the dark chamber, where a staircase led even deeper into the hospital. Down there, I found what I had feared most, a room full of patients, or what was left of them. They sat in complete apathy, with the same hollow eyes as Edgar. All of them were connected to machines, as if they were part of an experiment. It was clear the hospital had done more than just treat them. It had transformed them into something different. At the back of the room, a large screen was glowing, displaying a number I didn't understand at first. It was 666 in pulsing red letters. Beside it, a phrase appeared. The last line is only beginning. At that moment, I realized the hospital was not just a place for mental treatment. It was a place where souls were manipulated, where the human mind was distorted and erased. Edgar's last line wasn't about the end of his life. It was the beginning of something far more sinister. I ran back to the surface, but what I saw at the reception chilled me to the bone. The nurse, the only other person seemingly present in the hospital that night, was watching me. When he saw me, he smiled in a way that sent ice through my veins. "You went down there, didn't you?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "You knew all along?" "You knew what was happening here?" I asked, my voice shaking. He simply smiled wider. "There's no turning back now, my friend. The last line has already been written. Now it's time for you to start reading." I never saw that hospital again. And as time passed, I knew that everything I saw that night, what I had found, was still there, waiting for more souls to be manipulated, more minds to be broken. I learned the hard way that sometimes what we call the end is only the beginning of something much, much worse. These horror stories show us how fear can manifest in indescribable ways, challenging us to face the unknown and confront our deepest nightmares. If you've ever felt that something was off in a certain place or encountered the unexplainable, rest assured, you are not alone. The mysteries beyond are always lurking, ready to strike when we least expect it. Now, before we wrap up, tell me, which of these stories scared you the most? Have you ever experienced something supernatural or encountered something you just can't explain? Leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming mysteries. Stay alert, because the next story might be even more terrifying. And who knows, you could be the next victim of this mystery. See you in the next video, and may you sleep with one eye open.